Furious Labour MPs won't support Keir Starmer again after digital ID U-turn. Labour MPs are absolutely furious with Keir Starmer after yet another humiliating U-turn, and this time it's backbenchers saying they won't support policies publicly anymore because Number 10 keeps making them look stupid by changing its mind 5 minutes later. Welcome back to UK Political Insight, and today we're unpacking the digital ID fiasco, where Starmer demanded MPs defend mandatory digital identification for right-to-work checks, only to water it down when pressure mounted. Why one MP says colleagues must think very carefully before defending policy decisions publicly, because this stuff leaves them looking really stupid. That's not partisan opposition criticism, that's a government backbencher saying he can't trust his own leadership to stick with policies long enough that defending them won't make him look like an idiot. That's catastrophic for party discipline and governmental effectiveness, because if your MPs won't publicly support policies for fear of imminent U-turns, you've lost the ability to build public support for anything. The timing here is delicious because Wes Streeting literally just told colleagues to stop carrying out U-turns at the Institute for Government conference. He said Labour's New Year's resolution should be to get it right first time, and immediately, literally immediately, the government executes another U-turn on digital ID. You couldn't write comedy this good. Streeting standing there saying we need to stop reversing policies, and his colleagues are proving him right by reversing another one before the ink's dry on his speech. The digital ID scheme itself is interesting because what's changed is subtle but significant. The scheme will still go ahead, but the compulsory element requiring everyone to provide digital ID to prove right to work has been cancelled. So digital ID exists, right to work checks are still mandatory, but you can use other forms of digital documentation instead of the specific digital ID. That's watering down from mandatory digital ID to mandatory digital checks that could be various things, including digital ID. That's definitionally not what was originally announced. When she says this isn't a massive U-turn because they said they'd have digital checks and that's what they're continuing to do, she's being deliberately misleading. The original policy was specifically mandatory digital ID. The new policy is mandatory checks that could use various digital documents. Those are different things. Pretending they're the same while changing the policy is gaslighting, and journalists and MPs can see right through it. Dame Patel's response is cutting because she highlights Starmer's original justification. He claimed digital ID would stop small boats, which was always absurd, but he said it anyway. Patel saying he was clearly making it up as he goes along, and this failed project should make government ashamed they proposed such a spurious scheme in the first place. That's damning because it questions not just the reversal, but the original proposal's entire logic. The comparison to Tony Blair's ID attempt is historically illuminating. Blair tried mandatory ID cards, faced massive backlash about civil liberties and government overreach, was forced to water it down to voluntary scheme, and then the coalition government scrapped it entirely. Starmer's repeating that pattern in compressed timeframe, proposing mandatory digital ID, facing pressure, watering it down, and setting it up for potential future scrapping. He's learning nothing from recent political history. The Tony Blair Institute's response is fascinating because they're trying to spin this as change in approach, not change in direction, which is sophisticated word games that mean absolutely nothing. If you change from mandatory to optional, that's a change in direction, regardless of how you frame it. Their argument that the real test is whether it's good enough people choose it voluntarily is fine as policy position, but it's admitting the mandatory element was wrong, which is exactly what critics are saying. Ryan Wayne's point about digital ID making interactions easier so people will choose it is the argument for voluntary adoption. If it's genuinely beneficial, you don't need to mandate it. People will opt in. The fact they initially proposed making it mandatory suggests they didn't believe it was good enough people would choose it voluntarily, which undermines the entire value proposition. You only mandate things people wouldn't choose freely. What makes this U-turn particularly damaging is it follows the established pattern perfectly. Announce tough-sounding policy, demand backbenchers support it publicly, face pressure from civil liberties groups, privacy advocates, or internal critics, water the policy, leave MPs who defended the original policy looking stupid, and repeat. At some point, MPs learned the lesson and stopped defending policies, which is exactly what Carl Turner is saying. He's been burned enough times that he won't stick his neck out anymore. The political consequences of this for party management are severe. Whips need MPs to publicly support government policies to build popular support and demonstrate unity. If MPs refuse because they don't trust policies will survive contact with reality, whips lose that tool. You're left with cabinet members defending policies while backbenchers stay silent or actively criticize, which looks like division and weakness. That makes governing harder and opposition easier. The substantive policy question of digital ID is actually worth discussing because there are legitimate arguments on both sides. Proponents say it modernizes identity verification, reduces fraud, makes services more efficient. Opponents worry about privacy, government overreach, surveillance state implications, and practical implementation challenges. These are real trade-offs that deserve serious debate. What we're getting instead is policy announcement, backlash, reversal, and repeat. The right-to-work element specifically is interesting because illegal employment is a genuine problem. People working without legal right undercuts wages, funds illegal immigration, and creates exploitation. Effective verification systems could help, but mandatory digital ID goes beyond that specific problem into broader population monitoring that raises civil liberties concerns. You could address illegal working without requiring everyone to carry digital ID, which is presumably why they've watered it down. The claim this would stop small boats was always nonsense, which is why Patel's mockery hits hard. Small boat arrivals are about border security, processing capacity, deterrence, and international cooperation. Digital ID for right-to-work checks might marginally reduce pull factors if it made illegal employment harder, but it's nowhere near a solution to channel crossings. Starmer oversold it dramatically, presumably to make it sound tougher and more necessary than it actually was. The comparison to other countries' digital ID systems could be instructive, but is usually oversimplified. Some countries have mandatory ID systems that work reasonably well. Others have voluntary systems with high adoption. Britain has historically resisted mandatory ID cards on civil liberties grounds, which is why Blair failed and why Starmer is facing similar resistance. There's genuine cultural opposition beyond just practical concerns. What this U-turn reveals is the same fundamental dysfunction we've seen repeatedly. Labor announces policies without adequate consultation or thinking through implementation. They face predictable backlash from affected groups or civil liberties advocates. They realize the policy is either unworkable or politically toxic. They reverse course while pretending it's not really a reversal. MPs who defended the original policy are left looking stupid. Trust erodes further. Turner's warning that MPs must think carefully before defending policies publicly is the death knell for effective government communication. You need MPs out there selling policies, doing media, convincing constituents, building support. If they won't because they expect U-turns, you've lost that tool. Cabinet ministers become isolated voices rather than supported by parliamentary party, which makes them less credible and policies less likely to succeed. The pattern recognition here is what's really damaging. People have learned that labor policy announcements are provisional, subject to reversal, not worth taking seriously until they're actually implemented. That means tough announcements designed to look decisive actually look weak, because everyone's waiting for the inevitable U-turn. You've cried wolf so many times that nobody believes you'll actually do what you announce. Streeting's plea to get it right first time is the correct diagnosis, but requires capabilities this government apparently lacks. Getting it right first time means proper policy development, stakeholder consultation, implementation planning, political strategy, and communication coordination. It means thinking through consequences before announcing. It means not treating policy announcements as PR opportunities disconnected from delivery reality. Labor show no evidence they can do any of this. The cost of these U-turns beyond embarrassment is substantial. Each one requires parliamentary time to announce, defend, then reverse. Civil service resources go to developing policies that get scrapped. Affected industries and groups waste time preparing for changes that don't happen. Public trust in government erodes. Opposition gains ammunition. Future policy announcements are treated skeptically. It's comprehensively counterproductive. What Labor needs is a moratorium on policy announcements until they've properly developed implementable plans. Stop announcing things to look decisive or respond to immediate pressures. Take time to think through details, consult stakeholders, model impacts, plan implementation, coordinate communications. Then announce policies you're actually going to stick with. Revolutionary concept apparently, but it's how competent governments operate. The digital ID reversal specifically suggests internal divisions or inadequate preparation. If this was properly thought through with full cabinet support and stakeholder buy-in, it wouldn't have been watered down this quickly. Either they didn't consult adequately, ignored warnings, or had internal disagreement that wasn't resolved before announcement. Any of those options